Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are looking at a massive, absolute game changer in U.S. history, industrialization and urbanization. We're going to unpack the incredible economic benefits, alongside the, well, incredibly difficult challenges that totally define this era. The big idea here is actually pretty simple. Progress often brings prosperity, sure, but it almost always creates real, heavy problems that demand solutions. It's a story of mind-blowing inventions, but also profound hardships.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our lesson plan for today. First, we'll look at the engine of prosperity. Second, the heavy human cost. Third, fighting for fairness. And finally, morality and education. All right, Section 1, the engine of prosperity. Let's look at how industrialization boosted the economy. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the world changed. Imagine a world where suddenly everything hits fast forward. Step 1. Factories allowed goods to be made at unprecedented speeds compared to doing it all by hand. A single textile mill could spin more thread in a day than a highly skilled artisan could in a whole month. Step 2. Because of that mass production, those goods could be sold way more cheaply. And step 3. Thanks to new railroads and steamboats, these cheaper goods were being traded across the entire country in days rather than months. I mean, the sheer scale of this economic explosion was like nothing anyone had ever seen. You know, this massive shift completely changed the daily life of the average American. Before this boom, most people relied on farm work, which was, let's be honest, incredibly unpredictable. A drought, a sudden flood, or a bad freeze could literally wipe out your entire livelihood for the year. But factory work offered something radically new for these folks: steady wages. You showed up, you put in the hours, and you got paid. It's that reliable paycheck that drew thousands upon thousands away from the rural farms and straight into the rapidly growing cities. So pop quiz time from your homework. How exactly did this era of industrialization create more jobs? Well, the answer actually lies in the infrastructure itself. Think about it. Building those massive factories, operating the new heavy machinery, running the vast networks of trains and boats, all of that required a massive, dedicated workforce that simply didn't exist before. The economy essentially just willed millions of brand new jobs into existence. Moving on to Section 2. The heavy human cost. This is where we look at the dark side of the boom. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the actual reality for those seeking those steady wages. It was often absolutely brutal. We are talking about grueling 12 to 16-hour shifts 6 days a week. The pay? Painfully low. It was barely enough for most families to even survive on. And perhaps worst of all, they were working alongside incredibly dangerous heavy machinery without a single one of the modern safety regulations we have today. People were quite literally risking life and limb every single day just to keep that engine of prosperity running. And, you know, the hardships definitely didn't stop at the factory doors. Cities were growing way, way too fast, becoming dangerously overcrowded. Because they lacked proper sanitation or sewage systems, the streets, well, they practically became breeding grounds for disease. Add in the factories constantly pumping thick black smoke into the air and dumping totally untreated waste directly into the local rivers, and you have a severe, incredibly dangerous environmental and public health crisis on your hands. Let's do another quick pop quiz. What was one environmental problem caused by industrialization? When we stop and really look at the environmental toll, the damage was incredibly stark. Heavy smog was literally choking the city air, blocking out the sun in some places, and untreated chemical waste was poisoning local water sources. The rapid, wild growth of industry simply outpaced anyone's ability, or frankly, willingness, to keep the environment clean. This whole situation created a massive, glaring divide in society. On one side, you had wealthy factory owners and railroad tycoons accumulating just unimaginable new wealth. On the exact opposite side, the workers operating the dangerous machines were trapped in overcrowded slums, struggling just to put food on the table. This extreme gap sparked some fierce, highly passionate debates over fairness and justice in the American economy. So, back to your homework. Pop quiz. How did industrialization affect the gap between rich and poor? It's incredibly clear, right? It blew that gap wide open. A very small group of industrialists became richer than anyone had ever seen in human history, while the vast majority of the working class remained entirely trapped in poverty. This dynamic really cemented a severe economic inequality that pretty much defined the entire era. Let's synthesize this for a second. Name one benefit and one challenge of industrialization. If we weigh this era on a scale, it's like a giant balancing act. On one hand, you have the creation of new jobs, steady wages, and cheaper goods. But on the other hand, you have dangerous working conditions, heavily overcrowded cities, and severe unchecked pollution. To truly understand this history, we have to hold both of those realities in our minds at the exact same time. Section 3, Fighting for Fairness. Let's talk about the push for reform. Let's move to and see how this builds, because everyday people didn't just sit back and accept these terrible conditions. Workers realized pretty quickly that while one individual had zero power against a wealthy factory owner, together they had leverage. Early labor movements started to form. They were organizing strikes, coordinating big campaigns for livable wages, and demanding much safer workplaces. These brave, highly coordinated efforts laid the absolute foundation for the labor rights that we all rely on today. Final pop quiz question here. Why did some workers join labor unions? The motivation was born out of sheer, absolute necessity. The grueling hours, the incredibly low pay, and the wildly unsafe conditions were simply intolerable anymore. By banding together, workers could finally negotiate for a baseline of safety and just the basic human dignity that they rightfully deserved.
When we look back at these oppressed factory workers struggling in the city slums, it is so vital that we view it through a moral lens. The scriptures actually provide clear historical guidance on this very dynamic. Psalm 82 verse 3 commands us to defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. You see, when we study history, we aren't just memorizing old dates and random inventions. We are learning about human beings.
So the crucial point is that progress really can't just be measured in dollars and cents, or, how fast a new steamboat can travel. The ultimate goal of all these early labor reforms was to balance incredible economic growth with actual, real human well-being. A thriving economy matters, certainly, but ensuring people are treated with dignity and kept safe, that is absolutely paramount.
All right, our final section. Section 4, Morality and Education. This ties directly into the HeroesMart philosophy. We've seen the historical trajectory really clearly today, right? Prosperity brought incredible new wealth and jobs, which very quickly resulted in massive societal challenges, like overcrowding and danger, ultimately forcing a major push for reform from early labor movements. History shows us exactly what happens when progress speeds ahead without a conscience. And for all of you 8th graders watching, this is exactly why intertwining moral grounding with your learning is so incredibly vital. Those early industrialists, they were brilliant, they were innovative, they built world-changing businesses. But because many of them completely lacked a moral compass regarding their workforce, their progress caused immense human suffering. The core takeaway here is that education without morality can actually be deeply destructive. Raw intelligence is only as good as the choices you make with it.
The antidote to that kind of destructive, purely profit-driven mindset is spiritual grounding. Romans chapter 8, verses 6 through 7 promises peace of mind to everyone who keeps his or her mind spiritual. Think about the utter chaos, the rampant pollution, the desperate strikes, and the severe physical danger of those early industrial cities. There was zero peace there. Engaging with your learning through a solid moral framework grants you the wisdom and the peace of mind to use your intelligence for good.
We have clearly seen today that industrial progress without morality inevitably hurts people. So, as you continue to learn and eventually, enter the workforce yourself, how will you use your knowledge to ensure that future growth in whatever field you choose always balances creating wealth with protecting human well-being? Keep that question in the back of your mind. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.